Well, hello, welcome back to the channel.
Do you like to build things on your own?
Because this week, we'll be installing a roof rack.
That's not all. Don't forget about the vent fans and the plywood panel walls.
Are you ready for more tips on how to do things on your own? Well, you've come to the wrong place. Stick around, episode 5. This should be fun.
Right across this country into the starlight, 12,000 miles, turn back, do it again. No destination, it's just a journey. You were my lover and friend.
This is episode 5. We are putting the roof rack on the Unicell, we are installing the vent fans, and we are cutting the plywood walls that the vehicle came with.
Yeah, let's get right into it.
First up this week was those plywood walls. Now, when you saw us do the demo of the Unicell, you saw that this vehicle came with plywood already cut to the exact sizes of the walls, but we had now cut in the windows and the door. So we decided we were gonna keep this plywood. It's fairly thin. It was about 3/8 inch thick. So the first thing we had to do was get each piece of ply back into its original spot in the vehicle. Once that was done, we did a really rough outline of each window and the door. And then we made that cut. So it's not exactly perfect right now, but it will be in the future. Once the windows are installed, we can go back and trim it to the perfect size.
Yeah, this stuff could be less than fun, but always good to cut small and deal with the tedious nature of cleaning it up later than to cut it too big. Then you need a whole new piece of wood. So we just kind of played it safe here, and it's up there, and then we'll clean it up in a little bit.
So we worked through all 8 pieces of ply like this, holding it up, tracing it, and some of them ended up being really weird shapes because they would span 2 windows or half a window or the door, and they ended up being really weird shapes. But once they all came together, they fit into the exact shape they needed to be.
Yeah, once you cut all that wood out, quickly turn into giant lasagna noodles.
This is where we decided that we were going to coat each piece with Kilz mold and mildew. This is a product that we discovered when doing our bed frame. We would coat the plywood that goes underneath the mattress and the dendri with Kilz because that's an area of the vehicle that tends to hold moisture and will get mold or mildew. So we really like this product, and we think that it can be used in so many more applications within the vehicle. It's a really good preventative step to make sure that you're not getting mold in your vehicle. Painting is one of my favorite parts of these builds, so I actually had a lot of fun laying each sheet out and coating it with the Kilz.
From my winter hell, I've got candles and candy. I can be your daddy if you only let me creep into your prison cell. Hey baby, can you tell I'm not a criminal? Your choice is seminal. I want you to stay true to what's right for you. No matter who or know what will others say. Just find your way and try to stay true. Speak low, stand in your row.
Once everything was dry, we brought the plywood back into the vehicle and we just sort of set them in place. We didn't permanently install them yet. We'll have to wait till we get the windows in there, which we will be doing next week, and then we'll lock them down and they'll be secure. The next big project this week was getting that roof rack up there and really just planning for it. So you might have saw last year when we put the roof rack on and we had to make some kind of crazy moves with the chimney later for the heater.
We lost so much space on the bus that we did last summer because of the bubbly, unstructured front to the roof that everywhere that we could fit solar panels, we were putting them, and there was no room for that chimney. So we did have to do kind of a funky little bracket for it to turn and come up, and then the cap was straight up and down. But it was a lot of extra work to do that.
While you're gonna lose a bit of roof space if you're doing a chimney like this, this roof is very large, so we're pretty confident about the amount of solar we can still get up there. It's going to be ample, so it's not a real issue. If you were dealing with a smaller vehicle, you'd want to consider different options, I think, if you were worried about how big of a rack and how many solar panels you could get up there.
Tell me what you like. Please tell me what you like. There's nothing wrong with that. Trippy and we all lose track. I wouldn't mind it.
Once the hole for the chimney was drilled, we just kind of left it in place. It's almost a placeholder for where that heater is gonna be, just making sure that that's considered in the final roof rack. Eventually, it will get the chimney up through it, and then the deck cap that comes with the Dickinson heater.
Right. Once we had the chimney location figured out and the total width we could use figured out, we got the panels we wanted, and now we had to figure out how to design this rack. Now these panels are going to be pretty large, and I was not comfortable with just simply having 4 points of contact in each corner to hold the panels down. Now last year I did 3 on each side, but those panels weren't as long. And these are really long, and they'll be going width way on the bus. So I wanted to put support in the middle. So we decided to do 3 unistrut rails. So there's a middle point where you can lock down. So now you'll have 6 solid points of contact, plus 1 that's right in the middle, which will prevent the panel from getting any movement on it from wind or when you're driving. I feel really good about what we've done here, and I think we pretty much had to do it this way given the size of the panels.
This roof is huge, and it's flat, which is a blessing after dealing with the roof on the bus last summer, which was very dramatically curved. This roof is gigantic and there is no curve to it, so we had a ton of options for solar panels, and honestly we could have fit so many watts of solar on that roof, but eventually you just don't need that many watts of solar, so we kind of cut it off at a certain point, and you'll see that when we do the solar panel install. We'll tell you all about those panels. But not only is the roof huge, these panels are a really significant size, so we just want to make sure that they have all the support that they need when we're driving down the highway with them.
Yeah, I believe they're 74 inches long, which would be the width way. So 74-inch span with no support in the middle just felt like too much, and I'm pretty sure that the spec recommendation, they're residential panels. They're not being installed at only 4 points of contact. It's not how you do it. They're just too big for that.
One of our big goals with this roof rack was to not raise the height of the vehicle any more than necessary. This vehicle is already taller than our bus, not by a lot, but we still wanted to be conscious of the height because we don't want to have too many issues with bridges and tree branches. We just really didn't want to make it taller than necessary, so a low profile roof rack was really a huge goal of ours when designing this. This roof rack is made of Unistrut, as you've probably seen all the roof racks that we've done on these buses and now the Unicell. They all involve Unistrut because there's a million components for the Unistrut, and it's easy to get, it's easy to use and install. So we have the Unistrut as the main component, and then underneath that Unistrut, each foot is made of a plastic spacer. So starting on the inside, we have a bolt that spans the whole length of the roof rack from inside to outside. We then put a washer on that bolt. It's stuck up through the 1x2 that we added. This is the framing that we welded into place. It goes through the fiberglass, through that plastic spacer, up through the unistrut. Then there's a square washer and a lock nut to tighten it all down. So this is just the main kind of profile of the roof rack. You can see each one of these components from inside to outside. The unistrut that we were able to get comes in 10-foot runs. Of course, we needed 14 feet on each side. So that meant that I had to weld a few pieces on the end to make a longer section. Once I did that, we painted everything black. That's kind of the accent color that we're going with in this build. You know, the windows are black, kind of this seam around the outside is black, the accent on the door is black, so we figured that the roof rack would look good in that color also.
Once we finally had the whole plan all hashed out, it was time to execute it. Now this part, like every other hole you gotta put in the bus, stressful.
More holes in the vehicle.
You gotta be accurate. This one you gotta probably be more accurate than anything, particularly because you're running a straight bar of metal from the front to the back of the vehicle. So these holes need to be as close as possible, because if they're not, you're going to have a bolt up through there and it's not going to sit in the strut, or it's going to be putting a ton of tension on it. So once we knew the exact distance, we started drilling the holes and cross your fingers a little bit.
Measure, check, recheck, measure again, go back. Think about it. Is this really what you want to do? Is this a good idea? Okay, let's measure one more time. And then you drill the holes.
You'll see my brother here is helping us out, so you'll see him in the background footage. And he was nice enough to come by that day and just help us kind of work through the calculations and just do the labor of getting those holes in there.
So the next day is when we actually did the install. We got all of the unistrut bars up on the roof. The holes were already drilled, so we were pretty much ready to go. We had all our components, the bolts, the washers, the lock nuts, and all we really had to do here was actually install everything.
So I burned the map, I ignored the signs, been feeling far away, 2 years in a couple of days. I just wave my hand to the world outside like it's all okay. I can't believe what my eyes have seen, I just woke up from a broken dream. Who can stop my hands from shaking? I need you to take them, and I don't wanna wait all night. I'm coming alive and my senses are a little demented. Can this be right?
In general, we don't use silicone on the exterior of our vehicles, but with all our roof racks, we've used silicone on the bolts that go through the roof and also kind of inside the ceiling to seal everything up, and we've never had a leak from the ceiling with this method. So I'm going with the if it isn't broke, don't fix it, because we have never had a leak and we had a tube of silicone sitting around, so we decided to go with it again. And on each bolt, I put the washer on and then just cover the whole thing in silicone. I also put silicone into the hole of each plastic spacer and also up into the hole that the bolt's gonna go through. No reason to not overdo it here because a leak is so disappointing. So we just kind of goop everything up with this silicone, give it the best chance of sealing possible, and then you stick it right up through the hole in the ceiling. And the silicone really kind of is inside of the ceiling and inside of that spacer. It's not really on the outside of the vehicle. So it's worked pretty well for us. You could use a million different types of sealant here, so just use whatever you have available. Drew was up on the roof, and so he would line everything up. He would make sure the spacer's in place, that the bolt is going through the unistrut in the right place, and then we had a square washer on top of the unistrut and the lock nut right on top of that.
Yeah, it got pretty messy with that silicone, and the first thing you had to do is check that the rack was going to line up, because here's the issue with the unistrut with the pre-drilled holes. It's going to line up almost all the time, but you get a length of 14 feet. There's a chance that one of the pre-slotted holes might not quite line up with where the bolt's coming out of your roof. That happened to us one time in each bar, so twice. I had to open that up with a Dynafile. I've had to do this in the past. So most of them are going to line up. There is like a lot of room for play, but eventually it does happen if you're doing that many holes.
Once everything was in place, we went through and Drew would tighten down the lock nut on the roof as I'm holding on to the bottom of the bolt inside the vehicle, and you have to go through and do that for every single bolt.
Once we had everything locked down, it was looking good, and the roof rack is complete.
Then, of course, it started raining, which meant it was time to install the vent fans. So we had to back it up into the tent.
And it gets super hot in the top of that tent. So I was happy that Savannah was going to be the one climbing on the roof for this.
I had to do this for the bus last summer also. We were installing things up in the top of that tent. It's so hot. This was not a place I wanted to be again, but here I was. We had already done the work to figure out exactly where we wanted these vent fans to go, and we did that when we were reinforcing the framing. We welded in supports specifically for these vent fans. So we already knew exactly where they had to go, where the cuts needed to be made, because the supports were already there. So all we had to do was trace the inside framing of the vent fan into the exact space we wanted it to be, then get up on the roof, tape it off, drill the holes, and use the jigsaw to cut out the square.
Yeah, really good to have this plan in place beforehand, figure out what you're putting up there with solar, what you can put up there, and then plan out sort of the layout from there. So after we cut the initial hole for the vents, they didn't quite fit down. We just had to trim them, open them up a little bit. Better to cut small and then open it up more as you go. Once we did that, they dropped in. And it was exciting to see that happening. It already just makes it look way different.
This is such a satisfying feeling. It just really feels good when those vent fans drop into place. The next day we had a bit nicer weather, so we decided to go back up on the roof and seal everything up. Now, before we did this, we did have to add a little bit of a spacer to the supports for the vent fan. We put a piece of wood in there to kind of lift the fiberglass, because we noticed that as we were going to tighten down that vent fan, it was going to press into the fiberglass, and there'd be a little bit of pitting right there where eventually water would just sit. And you definitely don't want water just ponding around your vent fan that could eventually leak. So those little spacers helped raise everything up just enough that the water should run off of it. The first level of sealant on these vent fans is just butyl tape around the entire edge of the vent fan. I do a bunch of butyl tape here because why not? You definitely don't want it to leak.
Yeah, it's a really good product. It actually is one of the ones that does its job well and you don't have to fix.
So we get all of the tape on there, press it down into the hole, and then screw down into the supports so it kind of sucks itself down on the roof, and then the butyl tape is squished and it seals all around the vent fan.
The last step was to go around and seal all of the edges where the fans and the spacers from the rack meet the roof. So we used the Dicor lap sealant. We went around all the edge of the fan, also on top of all the screws that are on the fan, and around each little spacer foot that goes to the unistrut. Sealed all those up so there's no chance for any water to get in.
We really like this lap sealant. We've used it on all of our builds and we have never had any roof leaks. This is really cool because it's self-leveling. So even if you kind of make a mistake and it doesn't go on so smooth, it eventually just kind of evens itself out and it ends up looking pretty nice. Once we were finished with the lap sealant on all the different spots of the roof, everything was sealed. That's it for episode 5. The roof rack is fully installed and we are ready for when those solar panels arrive. We can't wait to show you what we picked out. We're really excited for them. The 2 vent fans are also in the roof. Everything is fully sealed and we have our plywood walls cut. We're now ready for the official window and door install coming up next week.
Yeah, these are really big steps that set the groundwork for the coming weeks to build upon that, and we are pretty excited to keep this thing moving. And that's going to wrap it up, and we will see you guys in about a week.